Imagine standing on a muddy field in northern France in the year 1415. The sky is gray. Cold autumn rain drips from the edges of battered helmets. Across the field stands the greatest army in Europe, thousands of armored French knights, glittering in steel. And facing them is a force that looks almost laughably small. A few thousand tired English soldiers. Many of them are farmers, craftsmen, and villagers. Their armor is simpler. Their banners fewer. Their king is young. Yet before the sun sets that day, the battlefield will belong to England. The 100 Years' War was not just a struggle between two kingdoms. It was a revolution in the way wars were fought. For centuries, the knight had ruled the battlefield, a noble warrior in shining armor charging on horseback like a storm. But the English army would prove something shocking to medieval Europe. That discipline, tactics, and the right weapons could break even the proudest cavalry. And the soldiers who carried that revolution were not only knights. They were archers with bows taller than a man. Battle-hardened men-at-arms. Mounted warriors who could fight both on horseback and on foot. And hardened veterans who had marched across half of France. This was the army of King Edward III and later Henry V. And for decades, it became one of the most feared forces in Europe. The backbone of the army, the men-at-arms. If the English army had a spine, it was the men-at-arms. These were professional soldiers, knights and heavily armored warriors trained for battle since youth. Unlike the shining nobles of romantic stories, the men-at-arms of the 100 Years' War were brutal, practical fighters. Their equipment was designed not for beauty, but for survival. A typical English man-at-arms in the 14th or early 15th century wore plate armor covering nearly the entire body. Steel plates protected the chest, shoulders, arms, and legs. Underneath, he wore thick padded clothing called a gambeson, which absorbed blows and prevented the metal from cutting into the body. His helmet could be a bassinet with a pointed visor, a shape designed to deflect sword strikes. Some helmets had chainmail hanging beneath them to guard the neck and shoulders. In his hands he might carry a long sword, balanced for both cutting and thrusting. A poleaxe, a terrifying weapon combining axe blade, hammer, and spike. A mace, capable of crushing armor with blunt force. Or a dagger called a misericorde, used in the grim final moments of close combat. Many English knights also carried shields, though by the 15th century armor was strong enough that shields were becoming less common. Yet what made English men-at-arms different from many European knights was their flexibility. They did not always charge on horseback. Often, English commanders ordered their knights to dismount and fight on foot. Standing shoulder to shoulder with the archers, they formed a wall of steel that could hold against cavalry. This tactic shocked many enemies. Knights were supposed to charge gloriously on horseback. But the English were practical. Victory mattered more than tradition. The deadliest weapon, the longbowman. If the men-at-arms were the spine of the army, the longbowmen were its deadly claws. The English longbow was a weapon that terrified Europe. It was not a simple hunting bow. Made usually from yew wood, the longbow could be 6 feet tall or more, nearly the height of the archer himself. Drawing one required incredible strength. The draw weight could exceed 100 pounds. Many archers trained from childhood, their skeletons literally reshaped by years of practice. Archaeologists studying the remains of medieval English archers have found that their shoulder bones were thicker, their arms asymmetrical from constant use of the bow. The arrows they fired were called war arrows. Each was nearly a meter long, tipped with iron heads designed to pierce armor. Some were narrow bodkin points made specifically to punch through chainmail. Others had wider heads capable of cutting through leather and flesh. An experienced longbowman could fire 10 to 12 arrows per minute. That meant thousands of arrows darkening the sky. Imagine the sound. Not one arrow. Not 10. But a storm. A whispering hiss through the air followed by the dull hammering sound of iron striking armor, shields, and horses. Before many battles, English archers drove wooden stakes into the ground in front of them. These pointed stakes formed a barrier against cavalry charges. Any horse trying to rush the line risked impaling itself. This simple defense allowed the archers to fire without fear of being overrun. And once the arrows began to fall, even armored knights were not safe. Horses panicked. Lines broke. Chaos spread. And chaos was exactly what English commanders wanted. Mounted archers and scouts, the eyes of the army. Another strength of the English army was mobility. Many longbowmen were not just foot soldiers. They were mounted archers. They rode horses not necessarily to fight from horseback, but to move quickly across the countryside. This allowed English forces to travel faster than many medieval armies. These mounted troops also acted as scouts and raiders. They rode ahead of the army, watching enemy movements. Sometimes they struck villages, supply wagons, or isolated enemy forces. These raids were known as chevauchées. During these campaigns, English armies would ride through enemy territory burning crops, destroying villages, and weakening the enemy economy. It was brutal warfare. But it forced the French to confront the English army on the battlefield, often on ground chosen by English commanders. The commanders, kings who led from the front. The English army was also shaped by remarkable leaders. One of the greatest was King Edward III, who launched the early campaigns of the 100 Years' War. But another figure became legendary. Henry V of England. Henry was not a distant king watching from a palace. He marched with his soldiers. He fought beside them. He shared their hardships. And in 1415, he led them into one of the most famous battles in medieval history. The Battle of Agincourt, when the impossible happened. The English army in France in 1415 was exhausted. Henry V had laid siege to the city of Harfleur, but the campaign had drained his forces. Disease spread through the camp. Many soldiers died. Others were too weak to fight. When Henry began marching toward the English port of Calais, the French army moved to intercept him. The French force was enormous. Some estimates suggest 3 or 4 times the size of Henry's army. Thousands of armored knights. Elite noble warriors. The pride of France. On October 25, 1415, the two armies met near the village of Agincourt. The battlefield was a narrow field between two forests. Heavy rain had turned the ground into thick mud. Henry placed his men-at-arms in the center. On both sides stood lines of longbowmen. In front of them, the archers hammered their sharpened stakes into the earth. Then they waited. The French knights began their advance. Hundreds of armored warriors moved forward. But the narrow field forced them to crowd together. And the mud slowed them. Then the archers opened fire. Arrows fell like rain. Horses screamed. Knights stumbled. Some fell before even reaching the English lines. Those who did reach the front were exhausted, trapped in mud, crushed together, unable to swing their weapons properly. And there, the English men-at-arms struck. Axes. Swords. Daggers. In the chaos, the heavily armored French knights became trapped like insects in armor. Within hours, the French army collapsed. Thousands of French nobles were dead or captured. Henry's army had achieved one of the most astonishing victories in medieval warfare. Why the English army was so dangerous? The English army of the 100 Years' War was not the largest army in Europe. It was not the richest. But it possessed something more powerful. A system. Knights who could fight on foot. Archers trained from childhood. Mobility through mounted troops. Commanders willing to break tradition. Together, these elements created an army that could defeat larger and wealthier forces. For nearly a century, the English army dominated battlefields across France. From Crécy to Poitiers to Agincourt, its victories shocked Europe. And even centuries later, the image of the English longbowman standing in the mud, drawing his bow as knights thunder forward. Remains one of the most unforgettable scenes in the history of war.